The first boy I ever loved died in a car accident. Adam and I had been together for 2 years, and from the moment we met, we were inseparable. He always called me as soon as he got home from school, so I was worried when the clock ticked past 3:30. Finally, the phone rang, but it wasn't him. "There's been an accident," she said. He was driving too fast. "I'm so sorry, Erin. He didn't make it." A few days later, I drove to the funeral home to say goodbye to Adam, but when I got there, they didn't want to let me in. "His body won't look the same as you remember," they warned me, but I didn't care what his body looked like. I just needed to see him. So my dad advocated for me, and reluctantly they agreed that they would give me 5 minutes. I walked into a room where he laid there, ravaged and covered with a sheet, with one hand exposed, and I grabbed that hand, and I remember being shocked at how cold it was. Nobody had told me about that. Time was moving so slowly now. I had 4 minutes. I had 3 minutes left before I would never see him again, and I recognized this moment as my last chance to love him. A few months later, time moved on for everyone else, but not for me. This is how I became involved in death work. Death is like a secret club. Everybody knows that it's real, but nobody wants to talk about it. But after Adam died, I needed to talk about it. So I began to study death, the physical facts, the spiritual awe, and the big questions like, what happens next? I looked to other cultures. In Jewish funeral tradition, for example, caring for the dead is one of the most honorable roles in society. From the time of death until the time of burial, the body is never left alone. It's overseen by a holy burial society, and the family expresses their grief. They rip their clothes, they cover their mirrors, they hang black curtains. In the most traditional of families, the sons will even dig the graves using backwards shovels to signify both their reluctance and their commitment to the task. And I thought, wow, what a stark contrast to our American way, where death and dying is big business. I want you to picture a funeral home. I imagine you're picturing a quaint little parlor, and it's run by a sweet little couple, and they're stoic and sincere. And there is some of that, and we love to see that. But increasingly, mega corporations are buying out these small funeral homes. And too often, that mom and pop shop that you see is just a veneer. It's just a clever ploy to emulate the aesthetic of a family home, but not the intimacy of it. In reality, your loved one may be being transported away from that parlor to a centralized care facility. It's a warehouse where bodies are lined up in rows for embalming or burial preparations. So I needed to learn everything I could about this, and I went as far as working at a funeral home for a while, which is a sales job. Funeral directors are often paid on commissions, and you'll hear them say things like, "Well, ma'am, if it were my mother, I would go with the premium package." And the poor client's just standing there, grief-stricken and dumbfounded. It's no surprise that the corporate funeral industry made over $16.5 billion in revenue last year. But it doesn't have to be that way. The funeral industry is a relatively modern invention. Across cultures, throughout time, people have always taken care of their own dead. That didn't change here in America until the Civil War, when soldiers were dying by the thousands far away from their homes. And it made sense before we had refrigerated transport. So we saw funeral homes start to pop up, first in the urban areas. But if you ask your grandparents, they may remember a time when they cared for one of your relatives at home. Because for most of us, it's only been a few generations since we were involved in the death care of our own loved ones. And we think it's time to reclaim that. Because no matter what the funeral industry tells you, it is not just conventional burial or fire cremation. It's not just package A or package B. Before death and during death and after death. You have a tremendous amount of choice. You can make your loved one's end-of-life experience as unique as they were. Because when your loved one dies, they don't belong to the funeral home. They still belong to you. So that's my job. As a death doula, I help people to navigate a sea of options to create a meaningful and a deeply personal experience around death. Did you know that when somebody you love dies, you can keep them at home for hours or even for days? You can take this precious personal time to be with them, to say goodbye, to bless them, to grieve them. I've had clients host living funerals where instead of being honored and remembered after they die, it happens before while they're still alive to receive it. Imagine giving away your most beautiful jewelry or your favorite art in a ceremonial way, instead of people rummaging through your belongings in a sad stupor after you've left. Did you know that there are many legal ways to be buried? Water cremation, for example, allows you to return your body to the earth in a way that feeds it and nourishes it. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. I have clients who are growing as evergreen trees right now. And this Christmas, instead of visiting a cemetery, their family members will visit a forest. They will adorn a living, growing tree. They will hang ornaments on it. They will bring rituals into the present tense. One of my favorite clients was Susanna. When I met Susanna, she was dying of kidney failure, and she was suffering through 11 hours of dialysis every day. So she made a very brave choice. She chose medical aid in dying, which is legal here in Colorado, and it allows terminally ill patients to limit their suffering and to die with dignity. So I went to Susanna's house and sat in her living room, and she told me all of these stories. She told me about her fears, her beliefs, her grief. And at the end of the conversation, she said it was one of the most important conversations that she'd ever had in her whole life. In the last days of her life, we decided to abandon all the rules, all the dietary restrictions that her illness had required. And I drove around Denver getting the best German chocolate cake for her and the best tiki masala that our city had to offer. On the morning of Susanna's death, we sat sipping fine champagne. And she told me how meaningful it was to receive the care and the community that she had needed all of her life at the very end of it. Her best friend came over and put purple in her hair. Her massage therapist came over and gave her one last massage with extra essential oils because she didn't want to be, quote, a stinky corpse. When the doctor arrived, she welcomed her in and said, "Dr. Death, I have been waiting for you." And we sat around her feet in a circle while Susanna told us the stories of her lifetime. It felt like a fireworks display going off. She was just bursting with energy and memories. And when she was done, she stood up and we walked to the bedroom where Susanna would have her final cocktail. It was a mixture of her prescription, vodka, and blood orange juice. She would drink this, and 10 minutes later, she would fall peacefully to sleep. And 30 minutes later, she would die to the sound of ocean waves and her cat Groucho beside her. After she died, I called her partner who had been driving around the neighborhood, and he came over. And together, we changed her clothes. We put her into this beautiful gown, and we washed her body. We blessed her. And when he was ready, we called the funeral home to come and get her. And then a couple of months later, at her memorial service, I got to deliver the eulogy that she helped me co-author. I got to give her words back to the people who love her. Susanna's death was privileged because every aspect of it was designed and suited just for her. And everybody here today is alive and well enough to think about your own deaths in a detailed and a meaningful way. Some of us will die of old age or illness. but others will die unexpectedly or tragically. And even in the most tragic of circumstances, if you know more about your end-of-life options, it can help you to create beauty inside of your loss. On February 17th, I was Zooming with one of my hospice nurse heroes, and my phone was blowing up. And I looked at it, and it was a series of messages that my sister didn't show up to work. Her boyfriend went over to check on her. And that's how I learned that my sister, Stacy, died by suicide. I drove through a haze to her apartment to face the impossible. My sister was a stylist and the most beautiful woman that any of us knew, and we knew that we would need to have a viewing. And this left me with a hard choice. Did we want to let people see the extent of her physical trauma, or did we want to cover that up? We opted for what's called restorative care, and we had a really wonderful local funeral home do the parts that we couldn't do. They covered her autopsy wounds and her bruises. And then our family went in to have precious time with her, to grieve her, to love her one last time. My teenage daughter really wanted to participate, but she was so scared to see her auntie like that she was willing to try. So we brought my sister's makeup bag and we did her makeup. We curled her hair. And we dressed her in designer jeans and her favorite pair of Chucks and a cable knit sweater. And my brother made a joke that we've done a lot of really strange things as a family, but dressing our dead sister was definitely the strangest. And we did cry and we stumbled and it was really, really hard. But over the course of an afternoon, all that fear diminished and we just felt love. And when it was time to go, my daughter didn't want to leave. She was laying with her whole chest across my sister's heart, crying into it, saying, I don't know why I was afraid. She's still my auntie. I still love her. 9 days later, it was time to return my sister's body to the earth. We chose water cremation, which is a gentle process using warm water and alkali that breaks the soft tissues and the organs down into a liquid that's very nutrient dense and nourishes everything in its path. And my sister was the same way. So my mom poured her into the ground. And a few months later, as winter turned to spring, my sister bloomed as a field of peonies. Now we go to the farm and we cut bouquets from her harvest and we bring her home to the living room table. We are all going to die. Don't you think it's strange that we care for the people that we love most of the way, but not all of the way through? We celebrate their births, their birthdays, their anniversaries, and their graduations, and their weddings. But when it comes to the sacred time of dying, we surrender. We give up care to strangers, to corporations. Is that really what we want to do? What if we loved our people all the way instead? You don't have to be a death worker to do what my family did for my sister. It will be scary at first. But once you push past the fear, the only thing left is love. Thank you.